our planet is filled with places that seem impossible. Landscapes so extreme that survival itself feels like a miracle. We often think of remote caves, burning deserts, or the deepest oceans. But impossibility is not limited to nature. Some of the most extreme places on Earth were built by humans. From highways clinging to the edge of the abyss to silent worlds hidden beneath our feet, we are about to enter the forbidden corners where a single mistake can change everything. Imagine driving through a narrow notch carved into a vertical granite wall, where the roof of the cliff overhangs the road so closely it threatens to shave off the top of your vehicle. The Pangi Valley Cliffhanger in the Indian Himalayas is a jagged scar of gravel and dust suspended 3,000 feet, or 900 meters, above the Chenab River. There are no guardrails, only a crumbling edge that disappears into a void. Waterfalls from the heights above often spill directly onto the windshield, turning the already slippery path into a mud trap. Local drivers navigate these turns with wheels inches from the precipice, relying on instincts honed by years of navigating the most treacherous stretch of mountain transit in the region. The wind here carries the cold air of the glaciers and the constant spray of the river below, creating an environment where a single loss of traction results in an immediate and irreversible plunge into the abyss. Can a road simply cease to exist twice every day? Along the Atlantic coast of France, the Passage du Gois connects the island of Noirmoutier to the mainland, but only when the ocean allows it. This 2.5-mile or 4-kilometer stretch of pavement is a deceptive trap for the unwary, as it is submerged under 13 feet, or 4 meters of salt water for the majority of the day. As the tide rushes in, it moves with a speed that can easily outpace a panicked traveler, swallowing vehicles and leaving nothing but the tops of rescue poles visible above the waves. Drivers must consult strict tidal calendars, knowing that a delay of mere minutes transforms a solid path into a turbulent, watery zone for their machinery. The surface is often coated in slippery silt and seaweed, making high-speed maneuvers impossible as the Atlantic Ocean reclaims its territory. many have watched their cars disappear beneath the rising blue, a stark reminder that the ocean does not negotiate for right of way. Deeper within the limestone heart of central Vietnam, a portal leads into a subterranean world of such immense proportions that it remains unrivaled on the planet. Discovered by a local farmer named Ho Khan in 1991, while he was seeking shelter from a storm, the entrance was lost for nearly 2 decades before international explorers confirmed its scale. The main passage stretches for more than 5 miles and reaches heights of 650 feet, offering enough vertical space to accommodate a 40-story skyscraper. At specific points, the ceiling collapsed long ago, allowing shafts of sunlight to reach the floor and giving birth to a localized jungle known as the Garden of Eden. Here, the temperature difference between the warm exterior air and the cool interior creates rising mist, forming clouds that float beneath the rock ceiling. Giant stalagmites, some towering over 230 feet, punctuate the landscape like stone sentinels. Deep within this isolated ecosystem, birds and monkeys find refuge in the high canopy of trees that have never known the touch of a winter wind. The cave acts as a time capsule, preserving geological formations such as rare cave pearls and massive flowstones that evolved in near-perfect isolation from the surface. The humidity remains high year-round, feeding the lush vegetation that carpets the fallen limestone blocks. When the morning fog rolls through the shadows of East Java, the boundary between reality and fantasy dissolves among the trunks of the Jawatan forest. The landscape is dominated by massive, century-old tamarind trees with sprawling canopies that seem to groan under the weight of their own history. These giants, originally planted during the Dutch colonial era, have evolved into living sculptures draped in thick layers of velvet green moss and cascading ferns. The trunks do not grow straight. Instead, they twist and branch into erratic claw-like shapes that mimic the aesthetics of an ancient, enchanted woodland. High above, small tropical birds dart between the sunlight and the heavy foliage, while arboreal lizards remain motionless against the bark, their textured skin perfectly camouflaging with the lichen. The forest floor is a damp tapestry of fallen leaves and shadows where the air remains heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. Unlike a natural jungle that grows in chaotic competition, the deliberate spacing of these tamarind trees creates a haunting, cathedral-like symmetry. Over time, The parasitic plants clinging to the bark have created a secondary ecosystem where life stacks upon life in a vertical struggle for light. Why does the second largest waterfall in China appear to flow with liquid gold rather than water? The answer lies in the massive volume of silt and sediment carried by the Yellow River as it thunders toward the Huku Gorge. The river, typically spanning nearly 1,000 feet or 300 meters in width, is suddenly forced through a narrow stone funnel only 65 to 100 feet or 20 to 30 meters wide. This extreme constriction creates a violent surge of kinetic energy, turning the muddy current into a roaring, golden torrent. As the water plunges 50 feet or 15 meters into the deep pool below, it creates a thick, yellow mist that rises into the air, refracting the sunlight into fleeting rainbows. The sheer weight of the sediment-laden water causes the ground to vibrate with a low-frequency hum that can be felt in the chest of anyone standing near the rim. Stone pillars along the banks are polished smooth by the constant friction of the abrasive, clay-heavy flow. A single limestone monolith rises 130 feet or 40 meters above the remote river valleys of western Georgia, supporting a secret on its narrow, flat summit. The Katsuki Pillar stands as a geological defiance, a vertical needle of rock that remained inaccessible to most of humanity for centuries. Atop this precipice sits a small church and a hermitage, their foundations integrated so seamlessly into the stone that they appear to have grown from the earth itself. The site has been a beacon of asceticism since the 4th century, though the ruins of the original medieval structures were not surveyed until 1944. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, a monk named Maxim Kavtaradze sought to revive the spiritual isolation of the ancient stylites. He spent 20 years living in near-total solitude on the summit, descending only twice a week via a precarious iron ladder to pray with the community at the base. Supplies were winched up in buckets, and the monk slept in an old refrigerator converted into a makeshift shelter during his first years of residence. The air at the top is thin and silent, broken only by the wind whistling through the valley and the distant chime of the monastery bell. Today, the pillar remains a restricted site, preserving a tradition of isolation where the barrier between the earthly and the divine is reduced to a few square meters of weathered limestone. Does a cathedral have the power to grow directly from a void? Suspended 3,000 feet or 900 meters above the Adige River Valley, the sanctuary of Madonna della Corona appears to be a physical extension of the mountain itself. Built into a thin ledge on the vertical face of Mount Baldo, the church's rear wall is the living limestone of the cliff. The current structure, dating back to 1522, replaced medieval hermitages that clung to these crevices for centuries. Constructing a Gothic facade at such a dizzying altitude required incredible logistical ingenuity, as every stone and piece of timber was hauled up the precipice using primitive pulley systems. Every arched window looks out onto a drop of nearly half a mile, reinforcing a sense of absolute isolation from the earthly world below. The facade stands bright white against the grey stone, a defiant mark of human presence on an otherwise impassable wall. The night falls over Pingtan Island, but the darkness is shattered by a neon blue glow pulsing within the surf. This ethereal light is not the result of pollution, but a defensive chemical reaction triggered by billions of microscopic organisms known as dinoflagellates. As waves crash or incoming tides disturb the water, these tiny algae emit a sudden flash of light through a process called bioluminescence. When oxygen reacts with a protein called luciferin inside their cells, it creates a cold light that transforms the shoreline into a terrestrial mirror of the Milky Way. During the peak summer months, the concentration of these organisms becomes so dense that the entire coast of Fujian province seems to bleed sapphire ink. Boats cutting through the calm water leave glowing trails behind them, illuminating the depths with a ghostly radiance. This fleeting spectacle depends entirely on precise water temperatures and nutrient levels, making the appearance of the blue tears a rare gift from the ocean. A vertical void opens in the rugged terrain of the Ural Mountains. Its rectangular perimeter, so precise, it suggests the work of heavy machinery rather than natural erosion. Sumgan Kutok is one of the longest and most complex cave systems in Russia, descending through 3 distinct geological levels. The entrance drops nearly 250 feet, or 75 meters, into a labyrinth of ice-coated galleries and vast chambers. In the brutal Siberian winters, the air trapped within the shaft creates a microclimate where frost sculptures cling to the prehistoric limestone walls. Small orange flames flicker directly from the cracks of a barren hillside in southwestern Turkey, burning day and night without a visible fuel source. These are the fires of Mount Chimera, a site that inspired ancient legends of a fire-breathing monster. Beneath the surface, high concentrations of methane gas seep through the fractured, metamorphic rock, igniting spontaneously upon contact with the air. Even when covered by earth or water, the gas finds a path to the surface, maintaining a combustion process that has persisted for thousands of years. The landscape of Gansu province looks as though a titanic artist has spilled a palette of mineral fire across the horizon. Zhangye is a geological ocean of solidified flames, where undulating ridges of sandstone display vibrant bands of crimson, amber, and emerald. These colors are the result of 24 million years of mineral deposition, where iron oxides created the deep reds and sulfur compounds produced the brilliant yellows. Tectonic collisions buckled these flat sediment layers into the sharp ridges and smooth waves visible today, creating a terrain that appears both fluid and frozen. Unlike many sites where photography requires digital enhancement, the reality of Danxia often exceeds expectations as the shifting light of the late afternoon intensifies the saturation of every hue. Erosion by wind and rain has sculpted the rock into pillars and ravines, revealing the internal brilliance of the stone. The hard sandstone ridges contrast sharply with the soft valleys, forming a texture that feels more like a vivid dream than a terrestrial reality. The horizon at Panjin disappears into a crimson sea, but there is no water in sight. This is the Red Beach, the world's largest salt marsh wetland, covered in a dense carpet of Suaeda salsa. This unique plant thrives in highly saline soil, staying green during the summer months, before transforming into a vivid deep red as it matures in the autumn. The resulting landscape is a monochromatic expanse of scarlet that serves as a vital sanctuary for endangered species. High-stepping red-crowned cranes, with their snowy white plumage and black-tipped wings, wade through the crimson stalks in search of food, creating a striking visual contrast. These birds move with a slow, deliberate grace, their silhouettes reflected in the shallow tidal pools that crisscross the marshland. The ecosystem relies on the delicate balance between the freshwater from the Liaohe River and the salt water of the bay. Every tide brings new nutrients, sustaining the cycle of growth and decay that keeps the Crimson Plains alive. Imagine a landscape that functions like a set of geological Russian nesting dolls. Situated within the province of Batangas, Taal volcano is famous for its bizarre, recursive structure. An islet sits inside a lake, which is located inside a volcanic crater, which is on an island, which is inside a much larger lake, all resting on the island of Luzon. This complex arrangement is the result of massive prehistoric explosions that formed a vast caldera now filled by Lake Taal. Despite its scenic beauty, this is one of the most dangerous and active volcanoes on the planet, with over 30 recorded eruptions since the 16th century. In January 2020, the volcano erupted violently, sending a massive plume of ash 9 miles or 15 kilometers into the atmosphere and forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of people. The inner crater lake once held a striking turquoise hue, but the chemistry of the water is in constant flux due to the magmatic heat and toxic gases rising from below. High concentrations of sulfur and localized seismic tremors make the volcanic island a volatile environment where the Earth literally breathes. From the rim, the steam rising from the vents serves as a constant reminder of the titanic forces trapped beneath the surface. 7 miles beneath the waves of the Western Pacific lies a realm where light is non-existent and the pressure is lethal to almost all known life. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the weight of the water exceeds 1,100 atmospheres, a force equivalent to an elephant standing on a human thumb. Bioluminescent jellyfish drift through the crushing weight like ghostly lanterns, their bells glowing with a haunting, rhythmic light that serves as the only source of illumination in this lightless void. In this perpetual darkness, 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters down, life has adapted into nightmarish and beautiful forms. Solitary Ophidichidae fish with translucent skin glide through the freezing brine, while peculiar colonies of glass sponges form what scientists call the forest of the strange. These organisms thrive on chemical energy seeping from the seabed, existing in a silent, high-pressure world that remains less explored than the surface of the moon. The cliffs of Hengifoss look less like a natural formation and more like a massive, layered chronicle of the Earth's violent past. Standing as one of the tallest waterfalls in Iceland, the water plunges 400 feet or 128 meters against a backdrop of striking horizontal stripes. These alternating bands consist of black basaltic lava flows separated by thin layers of ochre-red volcanic clay. The red hue is the result of iron-rich soil oxidizing between eruptions that occurred over 5 million years ago. As each new lava flow charred the vegetation and soil beneath it, it baked the earth into a hardened, colorful crust. The river Hengifossa has spent millennia cutting through these prehistoric layers, exposing the internal anatomy of the island. The sheer verticality of the canyon emphasizes the power of the water as it dissolves into a fine spray before reaching the valley floor. Hiking along the ridges of Chongqing is a test of nerves, where the only thing between a hiker and a sheer drop is a narrow strip of bare, red rock. Often called the dinosaur's back, these smooth, undulating ridges lack trees, grass, or safety railings. The landscape is a prime example of Danxia geomorphology, shaped over 20 million years by tectonic uplift and water erosion. The abrasive winds have polished the stone into steep, slippery slopes that resemble petrified waves frozen in a state of permanent motion. What remains when an entire mountainside is slowly devoured by the rain? In the Wairarapa region of New Zealand, the Putangiruwa pinnacles offer a haunting answer in the form of thousands of sharp, grey stone spires. These hoodoos were created by the erosion of ancient conglomerate rock over the last 7 million years. As heavy rain washed away the softer silt and sand, harder individual stones acted as caps, protecting the columns of earth beneath them. The result is a jagged, dusty labyrinth that feels entirely disconnected from the lush green hills synonymous with the country. This eerie setting was famously utilized as the Paths of the Dead in the cinematic adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, as the natural geometry of the pinnacles evokes a sense of ancient, decaying architecture. The wind whistling through the narrow gaps creates a low, moaning sound that echoes through the canyon, amplifying the desolate atmosphere of the site. Continuous erosion means the landscape is constantly falling apart and reshaping itself with every major storm. Imagine a river that runs with the acidity of a battery and the color of liquid fire. In the Patagonian Andes, Salto del Agrio plunges over a basaltic amphitheater dyed in vivid shades of ochre, rust, and neon yellow. The Agrio River is saturated with volcanic minerals and sulfuric acid, giving it a distinct, biting chemical scent that hangs in the thin mountain air. As the water falls 115 feet or 35 meters, it carves into the orange stone, creating a pool of shimmering turquoise and green. The hexagonal basalt columns surrounding the falls are painted with yellow sulfur deposits, making the entire site look like a landscape from a different solar system. No trees can survive the high acidity of the spray, leaving the canyon barren and hauntingly beautiful. This geological stage was built by the ancient eruptions of the nearby Copahu volcano, which still fuels the river's hostile chemistry today. The sound of the water echoing against the mineral-encrusted walls creates a low roar that fills the desolate valley. How does a massive complex of stone and timber remain anchored to a vertical cliff 3,900 feet or 128 meters above the valley floor? The Sumela Monastery in northeastern Turkey appears to be held in place by divine intervention rather than mere engineering. Founded in 386 AD, legend tells of two Greek monks who were guided by an icon of the Virgin Mary to a cave within the rock face of Mount Mela. For over a millennium, monks expanded this sanctuary, carving rooms directly into the mountain and decorating the interiors with intricate, vibrant frescoes. These paintings, covering the walls of the rock church, depict biblical scenes that have survived centuries of damp mountain air and absolute isolation. The The facade is constructed from stone blocks quarried from the mountain itself, allowing the structure to blend perfectly with its jagged surroundings. Reaching the monastery once required a treacherous climb up steep wooden stairs and narrow paths, emphasizing the physical and spiritual distance from the world below. Today, the site stands as a monument to the endurance of religious devotion in the most inaccessible terrains. Mist often rolls through the evergreen forest below, obscuring the ground and leaving the monastery floating in a sea of white clouds. Within the courtyard, the sound of water dripping from the mountain heights into the sacred spring continues a cycle of renewal that has lasted for over 16 centuries. The sheer audacity of its construction challenges the limits of what was thought possible in the 4th century. Utah's high desert is a landscape in a state of slow-motion collapse, where over 2,000 natural stone bridges stand as temporary monuments to the power of erosion. Arches National Park is a geological gallery of red sandstone that appears both indestructible and incredibly fragile. These structures were formed as salt beds beneath the surface shifted, causing the sandstone layers to fracture into thin, vertical fins. Over millions of years, water and ice expanded these cracks until the centers fell away, leaving behind the iconic arches seen today. The most famous, delicate arch, rises 60 feet, or 18 meters, from a natural amphitheater, its weathered limbs appearing far too thin to support their own weight. This land is constantly changing. Since 1970, 43 arches have collapsed, proving that these massive stone bridges are fleeting moments in a vast geological timeline. The deep red hue of the rock comes from oxidized iron, which glows with an intense brilliance during the golden hour of sunset. Towering mesas and balanced rocks litter the horizon, looking like the discarded sculptures of a giant. No two arches are identical, ranging from narrow slivers of stone to massive spans that could shelter an entire battalion. The wind continually scours the surface, carrying away grains of sand that were once part of ancient sea floors, slowly erasing the very masterpieces it helped create. In the silence of the desert, the groaning of the rock under thermal expansion is the only sound of a world in transition. A 1,000-foot wall of water plunges through an impenetrable green abyss that can only be witnessed from the sky. Located on the island of Maui, Honokohau Falls is a two-tier cascade buried so deep in the remote rainforest of the Iao Valley that there are no roads or trails leading to its base. Explorers must rely on helicopters to navigate the narrow, mist-filled canyons, where the air is so saturated with moisture that the trees appear to grow directly out of the fog. The surrounding cliffs are blanketed in a thick carpet of emerald ferns and ancient vines, creating a scene so primeval that it feels untouched by human history. These falls are fed by the frequent tropical rains that drench the summit of Pu'ukukui, one of the wettest spots on the planet. As the water hits the pool at the bottom, it dissolves into a perpetual shroud of spray that obscures the canyon floor. The sound of the waterfall is a muffled roar, swallowed by the dense vegetation and the heavy, humid air. In this vertical jungle, the rustling of giant leaves and the dripping of mist provide the only soundtrack to a world that remains a pure expression of nature in its raw state. Three massive bridges of stone, each tall enough to span a modern skyscraper, form a hidden world beneath the karst plateaus of Chongqing. Wulong Geological Park is home to the three natural bridges, a trio of limestone arches formed by the collapse of ancient underground caverns. The tallest Tianlong Bridge reaches nearly 800 feet, or 240 meters, its massive span framing a valley of lush forests and ancient outposts. This surreal setting is famously recognized as a backdrop for international action cinema, where the futuristic metallic aesthetics of robotic giants were contrasted against the ancient moss-covered stone. At the base of the bridges stands the Tianfu Post House, a reconstructed imperial inn that once served as a vital stop on the trade routes of ancient China. Deep sinkholes, known as Tianqing, create isolated microclimates where unique plant species flourish in the permanent shadows of the cliffs. Continuous waterfalls trickle down the limestone walls, feeding the emerald green rivers that wind through the canyon floor. The walls of the Alcantara, gorges in Sicily, appear to be constructed from thousands of black, hexagonal pipes stacked with mathematical precision. This striking landscape was born about 8,000 years ago, when a lava flow from Mount Etna surged into the freezing waters of the Alcantara River. The sudden extreme temperature drop caused the molten rock to contract and fracture into these distinctive polygonal columns. As the river continued its relentless path toward the sea, it eroded the hardened basalt, carving a deep, narrow canyon that exposes the internal geometry of the volcano. In the height of summer, the river remains chillingly cold, its crystalline water reflecting the dark, jagged textures of the surrounding stone. The sheer verticality of the walls, some reaching heights of 150 feet or 46 meters, traps the cool air within the narrow passage. Shadows cling to the fractured basalt, creating a subterranean world where the only light is the shimmer of water against the cold, volcanic rock. Turquoise eyes stare back from the blinding white expanse of the Tola Grande Salt Desert in Argentina, holding the secrets of the planet's earliest life. These deep blue pools, known as the Ojos de Mar, shelter ancient stromatolites, rock-like formations built by cyanobacteria that have endured for more than 3.5 billion years. These organisms were responsible for the initial oxygenation of Earth's atmosphere. The extreme altitude and high salinity create an environment remarkably similar to the conditions found on ancient Mars. As the first light of dawn touches the island of Java, a desolate landscape known as the Sea of Sand emerges from the darkness of the Teide caldera. This grey, ash-covered expanse surrounds the active cones of Mount Bromo and Mount Batok, creating a haunting atmosphere where the wind stirs up clouds of fine volcanic dust. The park is a rare geological theatre where multiple active vents coexist within a single ancient caldera spanning 6 miles or 10 kilometers across. Standing on the knife-edge rim of the Bromo crater, the world falls away into a swirling abyss of white sulfur smoke and the distant, rhythmic growl of magmatic forces beneath your feet. For the local Tenggurese people, these mountains are sacred dwellings of the gods, and they climb the steep slopes each year to cast offerings into the smoking crater. Dominating the horizon is Mount Semeru, which erupts with mechanical precision, sending plumes of ash and steam into the sky every few minutes. At sunrise, a layer of mist often settles into the caldera, trapping the volcanic peaks like islands in a white, ethereal sea. The stark contrast between the verdant outer slopes and the barren, scorched earth of the inner valley emphasizes the destructive and creative power of the Earth's core. Standing on the summit of Mount Teide is the closest one can get to walking on the surface of Mars without leaving Earth. This volcanic monolith on the island of Tenerife is the highest peak in Spain, rising 12,188 feet, or 3,715 meters above sea level. When measured from its base on the ocean floor, it towers over 24,600 feet, or 7,500 meters, making it the third tallest volcanic structure in the world. The surrounding national park is a scorched expanse of twisted lava rivers, jagged obsidian fields, and massive calderas that have remained largely unchanged for millennia. Due to its high altitude and thin atmosphere, the park serves as a premier site for global astronomical research, offering some of the clearest skies on the planet. During the spring, the barren red soil is briefly interrupted by the bloom of the red Taginastay, a plant that grows in tall crimson towers up to 7 feet high. Where does the Sahara Desert end and the Atlantic Ocean begin? On the island of Fuerteventura, the answer is a blurring line of golden sand dunes that roll directly into the deep turquoise surf. These massive dunes, particularly in Coralejo, are composed of fine organic particles and sand carried across the ocean from the African continent by the hot Kalima winds. This arid landscape is punctuated by dark, jagged lava flows and ancient volcanic cones that have been weathered into smooth, ochre-colored mounds. The extreme contrast between the black volcanic rock, the white sand, and the intense blue of the ocean creates a visual tension that defines the island's interior. In the remote valleys, the terrain is so desolate and wind-scoured that it resembles a lunar plateau with virtually no human structures to break the horizon for miles. A colossal stone citadel rises from the grey badlands of Utah, its fluted slopes resembling the heavy folds of a pleated skirt frozen in shale. Factory Butte stands as a solitary sentinel in the Wayne County Desert, its summit reaching 6,300 feet or 1,920 meters. The vertical grooves etched into its sides are the result of millions of years of water erosion carving through the soft Mancos shale. During a storm, the grey rock turns into a slick, clay-like slurry, further deepening the dramatic ridges that define its silhouette. Captain Tobias Furneaux named this coastline after the smoke from Aboriginal campfires he saw from his ship in 1773. But today, the landscape appears to be perpetually ablaze due to a biological miracle. The Bay of Fires in northeastern Tasmania is famous for its massive granite boulders, coated in a vibrant, orange-red lichen. This organism thrives in the moist marine environment, painting the ancient stone in a color so intense it glows against the white quartz sand. The granite itself was forged by tectonic processes over 300 million years ago, later fractured and polished by the relentless pounding of the Tasman Sea. In the shallow lagoons, the water is a brilliant emerald green, creating a sharp chromatic shift from the fire-orange rocks. Down on the pale shoreline, small wallabies often emerge from the coastal scrub, standing on their hind legs to nibble on dark ribbons of seaweed or sea debris washed up by the tide. The clarity of the water allows for a perfect view of the kelp forests swaying beneath the surface, untouched by industrial development. The water here is so impossibly clear that wooden boats drifting through the Pingshan Grand Canyon appear to be levitating in mid-air. Located in the Hubei province, this narrow gorge is carved through ancient limestone plateaus, creating a deep, shaded passage where the river acts as a perfect liquid mirror. In some sections, the canyon walls close in so tightly that sunlight only reaches the water for a few minutes each day. This rare illumination reveals the white sand and submerged logs on the riverbed, hundreds of feet below the drifting vessels. Earth remains a canvas of impossible architecture where nature operates without boundaries. These 30 wonders serve as a testament to the planet's raw, unedited power. The journey into the unseen continues with every horizon. Select the next path and witness the extraordinary.